The last thing Zara expected, standing at that altar, was for the man in the wheelchair to look at her like he already knew her. And the first thing Kang Jae-hyun did when he finally looked was make her feel like she had been seen before she was ready. She was standing at the end of an aisle in a dress she had zipped herself that morning, alone in a hotel room with nobody to ask if it sat right. Holding flowers in colors she would never have chosen. In a room arranged with the cold precision of a business transaction, every detail correct, nothing personal. The man waiting for her had not looked up once. Not when the doors opened. Not when she walked in. Not when the officiant's voice began filling the space between them with words that were about to change the entire shape of her life. She noticed everything about him in those few seconds anyway. The stillness. The black suit, worn with the ease of a man who had never needed a uniform to tell a room who was in charge. The way the air around him seemed to organize itself without him asking. Even seated in that wheelchair, Kang Jae-hyun occupied more of the room than anyone standing in it. The officiant asked the question. Zara looked at her brother Kofi in the second row. He was staring at a point somewhere past the altar. His jaw was set. He could not look at her, and the fact that he could not look at her told her everything she needed to know about how much this was costing him to watch. She thought about her mother's hands. The way they had looked the morning Zara left, wrapped around a cup of tea at 5 a.m., holding on to something warm because everything else had already been let go. She thought about the debt. About how long it had been building in the dark before Kofi finally sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her the number. About the name Kang Jae-hyun, spoken carefully, the way people speak names that have weight. She was 19 years old. She had never been in love. She had never pictured a wedding for herself except as something distant and freely chosen, something that would happen someday when she had enough room in her life to want something for herself. And now here she was. About to make a promise she had not written and sign a life she had not designed, to a man she had never met, in exchange for her family being left whole. What if this was the worst thing she had ever agreed to? What if it was the only thing that could hold everything she loved together? She said, "I do." And Kang Jae-hyun finally looked at her. His eyes were very dark. Steady. Not the indifferent gaze of a man completing a transaction. Not warmth, exactly. Something more specific than either. Something that looked, from exactly the wrong angle, like recognition. Like a man who had arrived somewhere he had been moving toward for a long time. She told herself it meant nothing. It was a formal occasion. People looked at each other. It was nothing. But she would think about that look for months. She would turn it over in the quiet, late at night, long after everything else had shifted, and she would understand, too late to change anything, not too late to decide what to do about it, that the look had never been nothing. It had been the first clue. And she had filed it away and walked out of that room as his wife, not yet knowing that the man who had just promised her 6 months and her freedom had already been paying attention for 11. But how does a 19-year-old get to that altar? And what is in that file she is going to find 5 months later that will bring the floor out from under everything she thought she understood? Let me take you back to where this story really begins. But before I do, if you are new here, welcome. This channel is your home for the most powerful Afro-Korean love stories on YouTube. Stories that cross every distance. Stories where love is complicated and real and worth every difficult inch of it. Hit subscribe right now so you never miss what is coming next. Drop a comment and tell me what country you are watching from. I read every single one. Now, let us get into Zara's story. Kofi came home on a Tuesday evening looking like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally decided that tonight was the night he was going to put it down whether he was ready to or not. Zara was at the kitchen table with her textbook open when he walked in. She knew before he sat down. She had always been able to read him, the set of his shoulders, the particular way he moved when something was wrong, slower than usual, like a man choosing each step carefully. She closed the textbook. She waited. He sat across from her and did not speak immediately. He looked at the table. Then he told her. He told her about the debt, not the surface of it, which she had known about in the vague way you know about something you have all agreed not to examine too closely, but the full shape of it. How long it had been growing. How far it had gone past the point where the family could manage it quietly on their own. He said the name Kang Jae-hyun the way people say names that carry weight, carefully, with a small pause before and after, as though the name itself needed handling. He told her the proposal. 6 months. Her family left completely untouched. The debt cleared in full. Her freedom returned at the end of it, unconditional, with a settlement that would mean she never had to make a decision like this again. He said it was her decision. And then he looked at his hands. And she understood, from the exact angle of his shoulders and the way he could not meet her eyes, that in some sense the decision had already been made, not by her, not entirely by him, but by the accumulated weight of 3 years of a family trying to hold itself together with not quite enough of anything. What he was really asking was whether she would be willing to make it something they could both survive. She said nothing that night. In the morning, she said yes. She did not cry. She put the kettle on. She made tea. She spent 3 nights reading everything she could find about Kang Jae-hyun before she packed a single thing. It was less than she expected. For a man who apparently controlled enough of the right things to make a family's debt disappear with a signature, he occupied very little space on the surface of the world. Formal photographs, mostly. Events she could not name, rooms that suggested significant money without advertising it. In every frame he was centered, composed, dressed in dark suits that fit the way expensive things fit, like they had been made with him specifically in mind. His expression in each photograph was the same, not cold, not warm. Simply present. A man who had decided long ago that his face was not a thing he owed anyone. She found one article. An accident, 4 years ago. The details were careful in their vagueness, the kind of careful that suggested the full version existed somewhere and had been deliberately kept from anywhere she could reach it. She read it twice and understood almost nothing more the second time than the first. And then she found one photograph from before the wheelchair. She looked at it for a long time. She was not looking for a man to be afraid of. She was looking for something she could understand, some detail that would give her a way in, a way to make sense of what she was walking toward. She found neither. Just a face she could not read, carrying a stillness that apparently had nothing to do with the chair. She closed the laptop. She packed one bag. At 5 in the morning, the house was still dark and quiet in the way houses are when everyone in them is pretending to be asleep. Her mother was in the kitchen. She was holding a cup of tea she had not drunk. They did not say very much. They held each other for a long time in the dark hallway, and Zara memorized the specific warmth of it the way you memorize things you are not sure when you will feel again. She got into the car. She did not turn around. She knew herself well enough to know that if she did, she would not be able to keep going. The penthouse was on the 38th floor, and the elevator ride up was long enough for Zara to run through everything she had prepared herself for and decide that none of it was probably going to be accurate. The woman who opened the door was not what she expected either. Small, unhurried, with the kind of eyes that have seen a great many things over a great many years and made a quiet peace with most of them. She introduced herself as Mrs. O. She smiled at Zara the way you smile at a person arriving, not a transaction completing, not a problem being delivered, a person, and something about that small distinction loosened something in Zara's chest that she had not realized she was holding tight. Mrs. O showed her to a room with a west-facing window and evening light coming through it in long warm bars. There were fresh flowers on the dresser in a small glass vase. The towels in the bathroom had been folded with the specific kind of care that means someone was thinking, in advance, about the person who was going to use them. Zara stood in the middle of the room alone and thought, this does not feel like what I was told to prepare for. Which either means I am safe, or it means the danger here is a kind I have not yet learned to recognize. She washed her face. She came out. Jae-hyun was in the study at the end of the hall. The door was partially open. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, finished the sentence he was on, because he was clearly a man who finished what he started, and then he looked at her directly and said, "You will have complete privacy in your room. Mrs. O manages the household. We will discuss the full terms tomorrow when you have rested." Then he looked back down at the page. No performance. No careful demonstration of authority. No cruelty wearing the costume of courtesy. Simply clear information, delivered without theater, by a man who appeared to have no interest in making her feel small. Zara walked back to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the flowers on the dresser. She thought, I prepared for a weapon. I got a locked room with fresh flowers and folded towels. And I have absolutely no idea which one is going to be harder to survive. For weeks in, Zara had learned Jaehyun's patterns the way you learn the layout of a new city, carefully, methodically, without ever letting anyone see that you are still memorizing. He rose before 6. She knew this because the light under his study door was already on when she came down for water in the early hours, and because Mrs. O had mentioned it once in passing with the tone of someone describing a thing that had always been true and would always continue to be. He took his calls with the door closed. He read every evening with the kind of focused, unhurried attention that suggested reading was not something he did to relax but something he did to stay level, maintenance, not leisure. He ate without complaint about whatever was placed in front of him. He moved through the apartment with an efficiency that had nothing performative about it. He never complained. Not about the wheelchair. Not about the physical therapy sessions she heard through the wall on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, the particular quiet that follows effort, the sounds of a man working at something difficult without asking anyone to notice. Not about any of it. Not once. One afternoon she came around the corner of the corridor and found his chair caught on the edge of the rug, slightly angled, not where he wanted to be. He had gone completely still. Waiting, rather than calling out. Zara crossed the corridor, repositioned the footrest, straightened the chair, and stepped back. He said, "Thank you." Not performed. Not excessive. Not the thank you of a man managing an awkward moment. Simply said, the way you say something that is just true. She went back to her room and did not think about it. She thought about it for the rest of the evening. The next morning there was a folder on the floor outside her door. Inside, confirmation of her enrollment in an online design course. The one she had mentioned exactly once, 2.5 weeks ago, in a sentence she had not expected anyone to retain. Already activated. Fully paid. No note. No indication it had come from him at all. She stood in the corridor holding the folder for a long time. She thought, what kind of man does this and then says absolutely nothing about it? She came downstairs earlier than usual on a Tuesday morning and stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom. There was a man in the living room she had never seen before. Silver-haired, expensive suit, the particular bearing of someone who had spent so long being the most significant person in every room he entered that it had settled into the way he held his body, or had, until recently. Until this room. His voice was controlled but his posture was doing something his voice could not quite override. It was apologetic. Effortfully, unsuccessfully composed. He was explaining himself. Justifying something. The specific cadence of a man who had arrived with a prepared version of events and was watching it receive less than he had hoped. Jae-hyun was seated by the windows with the morning light coming in behind him, hands resting in his lap, a face giving nothing at all. He had not offered the man a seat. He did not move. He listened without interrupting, without shifting, without providing a single gesture that could be read as encouragement or relief. Then he spoke. 4 sentences. Unhurried, each one landing with the quiet precision of something placed deliberately rather than thrown. Zara did not need to hear the words clearly to understand their weight. She could read it in the silver-haired man's face, the way something in it settled and then stilled, the way his body made a small, involuntary adjustment downward. He nodded. Then he bowed, not the brief, polite bow of a greeting, but something lower and longer and entirely different in meaning. Then he left. Jae-hyun turned and found Zara on the staircase. They looked at each other across the length of the room. He did not look caught. Did not look embarrassed or calculating about what she might have seen. He simply looked at her, direct, unhurried, without performance or apology, and then looked away. Zara went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked out at the city and understood something she had not been able to find the words for until right now. She had been making a quiet, unconscious adjustment in her mind every time she looked at him, accounting for the wheelchair, subtracting something, applying a kind of involuntary arithmetic she had not even known she was doing. What she had just watched dismantled that completely. The wheelchair was not a detail of this man's life. It was simply furniture in it. And she was going to need to recalibrate everything she thought she had already figured out. It was a Thursday evening, and Jae-hyun was still in his afternoon meeting when Mrs. Oh asked Zara to retrieve a household document from the study cabinet, the insurance file, third shelf, left side. Straightforward enough. She found the right shelf. She found the wrong file first. It was not hidden carelessly. She wanted to be precise about that, because it mattered, whoever had placed it there had not been careless. But it was not hidden perfectly either, sitting just slightly in front of where it should have been, in the wrong section by exactly enough to catch the eye of someone who was already looking. She would think about that later. Whether the imperfection was accidental. Whether anything about this man was ever entirely accidental. She opened it. Photographs. Not recent ones. Ones taken 8 months ago, before any of this existed, before the conversation at the kitchen table, before the car, before the 38th floor and the fresh flowers and the folded towels. Her university campus, the east entrance where she always came in. The market near her mother's house on a Saturday morning. A photograph taken from a distance of Zara herself, not looking at the camera, not knowing there was one. Beneath the photographs, a letter. Jae-hyun's handwriting, she recognized it now, from the household notes, from the small precise script she had seen on documents Mrs. Oh had shown her. Addressed to someone inside the organization. Requesting the acquisition of a specific debt portfolio. Dated 11 months ago. 11 months. Zara stood in the study for a very long time. Then she closed the file carefully. She put it back exactly where she had found it, the same angle, the same position. She retrieved the insurance document. She walked to her room and sat in the chair by the window and looked at the city until the light shifted and the skyline moved from gold to gray to the flat dark blue of early evening. She was not asking herself who he really was. 5 months of watching him carefully had given her more of an answer to that than most people ever got. The question forming quietly in her chest was harder than that. If he chose me, if he built the door himself and then stood back and called it a rescue, what exactly am I supposed to do with that? She did not go to him the next morning. Or the morning after that. Thinking was something Zara had always done by going quiet, and going quiet was something she had spent 19 years becoming very good at. It was not avoidance, she had never been particularly interested in avoidance. It was more that she had learned, through long practice, that the first version of any feeling was rarely the most accurate one, and that the only way to find the true shape of something was to sit with it long enough for the noise to settle. So she sat with it. She was polite at meals. She kept to her routine, the design course in the mornings, her reading in the afternoons, the evening walk she had started taking in the 3rd week that had quietly become the part of the day she protected most. She did not avoid him. She did not seek him out. She moved through the apartment with the same composure she had arrived with, the same steady surface, and she kept what was underneath it entirely to herself. Jae-hyun did not ask what was wrong. He did not pursue the shift in her manner with deliberate warmth designed to draw her back, did not manufacture small moments of connection to close the distance she had put between them. He simply gave her the space. Completely, without comment, without allowing the silence to become a pressure she was expected to resolve. She was not sure she had ever been given space that cleanly before, space that asked nothing in return for itself. She was still thinking about that on the second evening when Mrs. O sat down across from her at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea and said, without preamble and in the quiet voice of someone choosing their words with genuine care, "He is not a man who does things carelessly. Whatever you found, and I am not asking, I have never once seen him do anything without understanding the full cost of it first." She did not say it as a defense. She said it the way you offer someone a single, verifiable fact and then leave them entirely alone with it. It was not a defense. It was a data point. Zara thought about it for the rest of the night. On the 4th day, she knocked on the study door. She sat down across from him without waiting to be invited, placed the folder on the desk between them, and said, "I want the full version." He looked at the folder. Then he looked at her. And he did not reach for anything, not a performance, not a careful reframing, not the kind of justification that arrives pre-constructed and asks you to accept its architecture without examining the foundation. He simply looked at her with the same directness he had given her since the first day, and he told her the truth. He had encountered her once before. 8 months before any contract existed, at the edge of a situation involving her family's finances, a meeting she had not known he was present for, a room she had walked into without understanding who was in it. He had watched her manage an impossible conversation with a creditor. Watched her hold her composure when most people would not have been able to, navigate something genuinely painful with a dignity that had no audience and no performance in it because she had not known anyone was watching. He had made inquiries afterward. He had learned who she was. When the opportunity to structure an arrangement arose, he had ensured the debt in question was one he controlled. He had wanted to offer her something, a pause, a window, a period of safety, without telling her the door was his, because he had understood, correctly, that she would not have walked through it if she had known he built it. He said, "I told myself it was practical." A pause. Brief, but present. It was not entirely practical. He did not ask her to forgive it. He did not describe what it was or assign it a name she might find easier to hold. He told her it was the most honest dishonest thing he had ever done, and that she had deserved to know the full shape of it, and that the only thing he could offer her now that was entirely clean was the truth delivered without a single thing held back. Then he waited. Not for absolution. Just for whatever she decided to do next. The 6th month ended on a Friday. The paperwork was on the kitchen counter when Zara came downstairs. The settlement documents, the dissolution papers, everything arranged in a neat stack with the composed finality of a man who had always honored what he promised. Jae-hyun told her the car was downstairs whenever she was ready. That the driver would take her wherever she needed to go. That everything was in order and the settlement was complete and unconditional. He said he hoped, and here he paused, the way a man pauses when what he is saying and what he means are not quite sitting in the same sentence, he hoped it had not been too difficult. Zara looked at the paperwork. She looked at the city outside the window, the one she had learned street by street, name by name, through 6 months of a life she had not planned and had somehow, without noticing the exact moment it happened, begun to recognize as hers. She looked at the kitchen that smelled, even now, like both their worlds occupying the same air and finding it suited them. She looked at the man who had told her the truth about the lie without flinching, without asking for mercy, and who had handed her back every choice she had from that moment forward without attaching a single condition to the return. She closed the folder. She said, "You built a door and didn't tell me it was yours. That was wrong." He said, "Yes." She said, "I'm not leaving." She said, "Not because of what you cleared, or what you gave, or what any of these papers say. I'm staying because you are the first person who ever chose me and then, when it cost you everything, told me the truth about it anyway. I get to make this choice knowing every single thing. And I choose this." He was very still for a long moment. Then he said, "Then this is yours. Not a contract. Not an arrangement. Yours." 2 years later, Zara was 21 and moved through the world like a woman who knew, from lived, specific, hard-won experience, the precise difference between being used and being seen, and would never again confuse the two. She was finishing her degree. She was building something, a small organization for young women navigating family debt crises, young women who were exactly where she had been at 19, being handed an impossible choice with no one to tell them they were allowed to want something for themselves. It was funded quietly, without public attribution, by a man with specific views about the ethics of taking credit for things you do simply because they are right. On Thursday evenings they cooked together. He had opinions about heat management she found equal parts irritating and entirely correct. She had opinions about seasoning he had long since learned to defer to without complaint. Mrs. O watched from the doorway with the expression of a woman who had seen the whole of it, every uncertain, difficult, costly inch, and decided that what it had become was worth every moment of what it had taken to get there. One evening, Zara looked across the kitchen at Kang Jae-hyun, at the careful attention he brought to everything, at his hands, at the particular way he said her name, like it was something he was genuinely glad to say, and she thought about a girl in a white dress at an altar, alone, no one to help with the zip, saying "I do" to a stranger and not yet knowing that the stranger had already been paying attention for nearly a year. She had been furious about that once. The secret of it. The presumption. She was not furious now. She was something quieter and more certain than fury. She was grateful she had found out. Grateful she had asked. Grateful that the truth, even the difficult, complicated, imperfect kind, had turned out to be something solid enough to build an entire life on. She had been walking toward this kitchen, toward this light, toward this man with his careful hands and his 11 months of quiet attention, her whole life. She had just needed to be the one who finally, freely, chose to stay.